Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I want to talk about the Kronhau again, only this time I want to talk about an unusual application of it. Kronhaus, or I guess specifically what we might call this is a Kronhau from Meyer, though in all honesty I don't know enough about Meyer to say whether or not that's accurate. But the point here is that it's a very unusual position and it's a very unusual response that I think can work really well if you train it. So first we're going to watch the exchange. It might have been easy to miss there due to the quality and the speed, but at this point, I've done a kind of Kronhau to my opponent's blade to try to get it out of the way. I'm throwing what is essentially a fake right Zwerchhau to try to open them up. But as I pull away, or as I basically miss my attack, my opponent goes from here, which is a Kron parry, directly into this plunging, almost Kronhau. It's kind of hard to tell, but as you can see here, their cross guard is completely vertical. They have dropped that short edge directly onto my shoulder. And as a result, when I go to push it away, they really are perfectly safe, perfectly covered. And in this particular situation, they are on the inside of my guard, which means that I can't bring my sword to threaten my opponent without it getting in the way of his sword, which means that he has effectively zoned out my sword and he's kept himself very safe. This is, I guess, technically a Kronhau from the base mechanics of the cut, but if you look into Meyer, and specifically Meyer's context, which is fechtschule, fight schools where they might fight to the highest bleeding head wound, you'll see this cut emphasized, which is basically anytime you parry in your high Kron, you can then just drop your short edge right down on top of their head and usually do enough to, get a good cut out of it. In the fechtschule, this would, make their head bleed and you'd win. And I think that there's a really good application here, even in regular Blossfechten, specifically because whenever you parry with your Kron, and your Kron's very high, you do have a lot of options, but not all of them are expected, and a lot of them require a whole lot of range of motion. So for example, I think the classic thing that most people will do is that when they go up in their high Kron and they parry on the left side of their cross guard, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to throw that right Zwerchhau low towards their opponent. It makes a lot of sense to do so. When you feel that pressure on the left side of your blade, you can easily raise both of your hands and then swing that point low, knowing that they're on the high left side of your body, and now you're attacking to the low right side, which means that they have to go from their top right side to their bottom left side very quickly in order to stay safe, and that's hard to do. But at the same time, that Zwerchhau requires quite a range of motion. You have to go from having your tip straight up in the air, circle it around, and then cut down underneath. And that's a pretty reasonable amount of distance to travel, although it can be done quickly. The other option is to do the duplieren, like a video of mine just went over. You parry up here, and then you immediately turn your long edge straight towards their face, and you chop straight in. But the difficulty of that is, of course, that it's often very, very hard to generate adequate force with that motion, because you're basically standing there with your arms at full extension, turning ever so slightly, and kind of just pushing with your arms. It's very difficult to cut with, and that's why oftentimes at cutting competitions, they'll try to force you into that situation as a way of filtering out people who maybe aren't as good at keeping their edge aligned. So this is an interesting alternative to that exact same situation. Say you catch your opponent's sword on your guard on your left side, and instead of going around for that Zwerchhau, you turn your guard just like you would for the Zwerchhau, but instead of coming all the way around, you simply take the distance that you've gained and the range of motion that you have here from your blade being straight up in the air and drop it straight down. You're sort of doing a similar action as the duplieren, which is basically going from your guard and your protected state and taking the shortest path directly towards the high priority target. But I'm of the opinion that plunging in this way with that Kronhau style cut makes it a lot easier to generate force. And it also means that you're not as easily guarded against the way you might guard against a Duplirin. So again, if we go back to this position and assume that we were making contact right here, if he was to go for a Duplirin, my cross guard would sort of be in the way. If you want to imagine that I could simply push my arm up into the air a little bit, I could easily zone out the top of my head. That would be the target if he were to go right from here and, angle his blade a little bit and push straight towards my face. This tiny adjustment of the raising of my hands is all it takes to get in the way of that Duplirin, which means that if you're expecting it, which in all fairness, most people are not, it does make it easier to parry. This plunge cut, on the other hand, means I have to raise my arms significantly higher because there is no angle to the travel of the blade and there's no angle that the blade has to go on in order to reach my head. So if you imagine someone's coming straight up and down on top of you, you have to raise your arm past the level of the top of your head in order to be safe. Whereas if they come in at a 45-degree angle, like with a Duplirin, you only have to raise your hand a couple of inches so that it's directly in the path of that angle. The top of your head can still be exposed because they're not taking that vertical travel. You're not in any danger. So what this Kronhau style plunge cut gives you is the advantage of being able to seek an opening that's still open right there at the top of the head. You get a little bit more range of motion and a little bit better travel with your tip, which means you can more easily generate force and deliver a proper cut. And you have the advantage of going for the closest possible target to the tip of your sword, which means that the travel required from your opponent to parry is significantly higher. If I go for that hanging parry, I also will basically have to shoot my hands up and squat at the same time to try to get my hands exactly where they need to go. Plus, considering that we're on the left side of the attacker's body, the right side of mine, I have to move my hands even a little bit to my left in order to protect the entirety of the top of my head. If you throw that plunge cut right here to the edge of my ear, maybe I could get my hands up to here and be safe. But if you throw it over here to the center of my head, I now not only have to raise my hands up, I have to move them over. And whenever you're talking about defense versus offense, every little inch counts. Every little inch that you force your opponent to move in order to be safe is an inch that you can use to land something completely scot-free. Think about with hand shots. If you try to pull your hands back as far as you can, but you only leave an inch of your hand exposed, that's all that it takes to lose all of your fingers. Similar here. If I don't put up a proper parry, all it takes is this to drop right down on the top of my head, and I've taken a pretty serious cut to the top. So overall, I think this is something that nobody really does, including myself. But honestly, I think it's something I'm going to be trying to incorporate now, as I believe that this cut, in a sense, finds a nice, happy little middle ground between the difficulty in cutting mechanics of the Duplirin and the slowness and ease of, stopping with just direct forward motion that the low right Zwerkow has. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to send me an email at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com. Thanks, and I hope to see you next time.